I am so happy today to start something new, and that is a founders panel. And not only do we have this esteemed panel up here casually sitting, we have all Cal founders, and that's not always the case for the people up on stage. Yeah, go Bears. So it's my pleasure to first introduce Elaine Lin Hering. And we often hear, actually I've gotten feedback, and I really do read over that feedback, that it's really great to hear from all these engineers, but there's so many non-engineers in the audience, it'd be nice to hear from somebody else. So we get to hear not only from Elaine, who has a combination of a poli-sci and music degree from Cal, but despite the fact that Elaine herself is not an entrepreneur, or maybe she is in a way, she deals with terrorists. I mean, you really can't get much more fierce than that. Elaine works at Triad Consulting Group. She is an expert in negotiations, influence, and also mediation and conflict management. She's taught at Harvard, she's taught at Tufts, she's taught at the law school in Melbourne. She's helped coal miners, terrorists, as I mentioned, and surely she can help moderate the two of you. We hope. So welcome, Elaine. And joining Elaine, I will actually go all the way to her left, is Vik Singh. And so Vik is extra special because, as you know, and often you all have requested to hear from younger and younger entrepreneurs. And I can honestly say that this semester we have the youngest entrepreneur in the audience, Vik's son, who's way in the back. I'm all excited. You can hear him in the background. Vik is the CEO and founder of Infer, which he founded in 2010, focusing on big data. His larger clients include SurveyMonkey and Cloudera. Infer has raised over $35 million in capital from investors like Redpoint and Andreessen Horowitz. And before working at and founding Infer, Vik was no stranger to search. He worked at Yahoo, Google, Microsoft as a researcher. And what's fun about looking at LinkedIn and having that available is that it's not often that you'll see that Jeff Weiner, CEO of LinkedIn, gives a recommendation for somebody. So I guess he was your boss at Yahoo?
Indirectly, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. He comes to us with, thank goodness, not only a computer science degree, but if I read it correctly, a degree in entrepreneurship and innovation. Is that correct?
Yeah, I took the classes here.
Yeah,
it just started
see?
when I was in undergrad, so.
Yeah. Fantastic. So one of just a handful of people who've come back to do that, and so quickly. And probably because, among other things, Vik is noted from MIT Review as one of the 35 under 35 who's really made an impact on search. So I'm glad you're joining us. And last but not least is Razmig Hovaghimian. Razmig is the co-founder and executive chairman of Viki. I think it's kind of nice to have Vik and someone who's founded Viki next to each other. If you don't already know this, Viki is probably the global hula. Because of his work with Viki, Razmig also received incredible recognition from the World Economic Council. You think I could read my own notes, the World Economic Forum, for actually bringing out a product that had an incredible impact on people, and that is bringing everybody together. I think that the programs that are in Viki are translated into 200 plus languages, and it's really a unique way of bringing people together. Before that, in 2007, Razmig was the co-founder and is the co-patent holder of something called Embrace. Embrace is a child incubator that was selling for $25. If you're old like me, you remember watching 60 Minutes where they did this show on all these cool people coming out of Stanford way back when. Obviously, it's changed now. And they talked about Embrace and what that had done. So it's kind of cool to have the co-patent holder for that here, so thank you. And Razmig actually is a political economy major from Cal and holds an MBA from Stanford, and he's been recognized by Forbes as the next generation of innovators. So welcome to our distinguished panel, and I will let you take it from there, Elaine.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Well, we're so excited to chat with you guys. I know folks in the audience have lots of questions for you. I'll try to tease out some of those, and then in a bit we'll open it up for Q&A, so be thinking about what you might want to ask our guests today. So Razmig, we'll actually start with you. What are you doing these days, and from student to now, how did you get there? We've got the nuts and bolts from Viki's description, but in your own words.
From student to now. So we're manufacturing hula hoops now. think she mentioned we are the global Hulu, not Hula, but that was a cute one. Hulu is a video streaming company. Close. So maybe it makes...
She's got an idea of your next business idea, actually.
Hula hoops, okay. So I born and raised in Egypt, came for high school, met my wife, stayed. I was going to go back, be a jeweler in Egypt, just like, three generations of Armenians. But then came to Cal, did PIS. After that, I actually was interested in startups because back then eBay was just starting out and they were at Haas recruiting. And I had no idea what shares were. And I was thinking, well, maybe I should get a job, pay my loans. I was a foreign student here. And I stumbled upon management consulting. Literally, there were flyers under the door at the International House here. Went for an interview, drew some graphs. It was basically math questions, and I got an offer. I was like, okay, someone's going to pay me $45,000. I'm doing this. So after Berkeley, instead of startup, I went into management consulting. I ended up in Japan with Dentsu, which is an ad agency. Then I applied to Stanford. I really wanted to start something. At that point, I thought it could be a good opportunity to hang my hat for 2 years, learn new things. Applied there, got there, and I tried as much as I could not to take business school classes. So I took the minimum. The first year I tried to kind of speed through it. Then I took classes in mechanical engineering, medical school, spent nights in the ER trying to figure out what's going on there. I just was so curious. I felt it's a good opportunity to just see a lot of things and see what's interesting. So 2 startups came out of there. One of them is Embrace, the infant incubator. And it was a challenge in the class. It was called Entrepreneurial Design for Extreme Affordability. So the foundations were set here, and then that was the opportunity to try it out at Stanford. So professor said that incubators are $20,000, and typically the incubator is 50 miles away from where the kids are born and where parents need them, and they can't really have access to those hospitals. Can you guys build one for 1% of the cost, which is $200? So we're able to design one, literally an infant sleeping bag with phase change material, which is kind of something like wax that stays at a certain temperature. We put it in a pouch. So we took that to market. It took 5 years. Like we were going to build a startup. We thought we were going to go to market in 6 months. It took us 5 years. It drove us crazy. And then while we were doing that, I was with classmates also playing around with the idea of Viki, which essentially is a combination between video and wiki. For Wikipedia, you have 150,000 people creating subtitles in 200 languages. And we have 40 million people watching these shows. So you can take a Korean drama and watch it in Arabic, open up the Middle East for that audience. Or you can take like a Japanese anime, put Spanish on it, open up Latin America, sounds Brazil. So that's the concept. We're really bringing down language barriers between great entertainment and fans. So I co-founded it, exited it just earlier, like last year now, 2015. I moved on exec chair on the board of Rakuten, the parent company. And I'm working on something new now, which I've been passionate about, but we'll talk about that some other time. But I'm here, I'm excited to be back.
Fantastic.
It was lovely walking up from BART, soaking up all this energy.
Yeah, it's bringing back all sorts of memories, as the three of us have talked about. So I love it. You actually graduated not intending to go straight into a startup, took what job you thought was interesting at the time.
Yeah.
And then when you were at Stanford, really looking around, what's interesting, what can I learn outside of the scope of classes, which then birthed these 2 startups. Fantastic. Let's get your rundown of the story, Vik.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to be quick. I mean, when I went into Berkeley, I was originally actually going to do political science, so I would have been kind of in a similar camp. And because prior to it, I was in hello.
Vik's son is helping to paint a picture of work-life balance, integrating family and career.
And so in high school, I was really into policy debate. So I spent my nights and weekends doing that. And so and in our high school, we didn't have computer science classes, robotics classes, that sort of thing. So I didn't really have something that would tell me that I wanted to do that, other than I had an interest in math. And I liked, playing with our computer at home. But everything going into college kind of pointing me towards this direction. Hey, I was going to debate. Maybe I should, follow that, into a bigger role. And you don't have that many options. You basically go into law or you go into research. And so I figured, maybe I'm going to do that. And then when I came into college, one of my friends actually convinced me to take a CS class. Just because I was interested in computer science and also in math, and And so I took the first class, I think it was CET-20160412-210208, and I actually really enjoyed the class, and so much so that I just completely switched and did that. And I figured, hey, if I study computer science, if I want to go into law, I can still do that, but I can't really do it the other way. And so it gave more optionality for me. And so, but I kind of went into computer science, freshman year, starting at the level 0. And it kind of, especially in a place like Berkeley where you have so many smart people, it almost feels like everyone here has been studying computer science since like the 2nd grade. And so you kind of just feel like you're always behind.
Since they were 4 years old.
Yeah, exactly. and so you just kind of always feel like you're behind. And so I tried to do everything I could to try to catch up. And I was taking grad courses freshman year, which was actually kind of silly. I shouldn't have done that. But I took a whole bunch of those classes. I was taking undergrad classes. I was just trying to read as much as possible. And then somehow kind of landed a position at Microsoft, doing an internship there. And there's 2 folks here who were coming from Berkeley who were also doing internships at Microsoft that summer, Chung and Yang, who were easily like the 2 smartest folks in CS that I knew here, and probably even when we were at Microsoft. So I just pretty much spent all my time bugging them the entire summer, and they probably were just super annoyed, but I just spent every minute I could with them just to try to learn and absorb, and we ended up becoming very good friends. And in fact, when we started the company, they were, we pulled them along, so they're my 2 co-founders. So we kind of met my freshman year of college here, and were able to kind of build that relationship. And we worked together at Microsoft, we worked together at Google, we worked together at Yahoo.
So what I'm hearing you say is choose your friends and company wisely.
Yeah.
And
just
if you find them, don't let them go.
Exactly. Find the smartest people in the room and try to spend as much time as you can with them and learn. And that's kind of what I did. And then it gets to a point where you're not doing so much catch up anymore. You're actually, I think the key, even in undergrad, is you want to specialize. Right? You kind of are told to do that more in like grad school, but I think it's actually really good to specialize in undergrad as well. Like you obviously take all the classes, but like in the case of computer science, I was really interested in like information retrieval and database systems. And I try to really spend a lot of my time in that area. And I kind of convinced myself that I don't have to be like locked to this area. I just want to learn how to go deep in something. Mm-hmm. And so just the process of picking something, even if it's not right, but if you go deep in it, the methodologies and approaches that you pick up from that, you can apply to any field if you try to go deep into it. And so I think that's what helped me kind of get into those roles at those bigger companies. And I ended up getting a position to work with Jim Gray at Microsoft Research, who he won the Turing Award in computer science. He invented the transaction for databases, which is obviously very important. Yeah. And got to work with him for throughout the summer, and then we worked together throughout the school year. And then we published a paper together, and then he set sail, and he's been lost at sea since, which was huge, had a huge impact on me, and he was an amazing mentor, and he was the first PhD in computer science from Berkeley, and big Berkeley fan, and he well, it's funny, even though he was so deep in research and publishing papers, he was the one trying to push me a little bit to go the startup path. And he's like, hey, I'll support you and I'll invest in you. And so when he went sail and kind of has been lost since then, it kind of stayed with me, that kind of track. And so when I graduated, I was fortunate because I worked with Jim, and he wrote my reference. It's almost like a golden ticket for a lot of programs. And so I thought about whether I want to do grad school or go into industry, and I decided to go down the industry path, and actually in large part because of Jim. And so I worked with one of his colleagues at Yahoo Research, and worked there and worked on a bunch of products there, and then decided to go do the startup route. And so that's kind of where I'm at now.
Yeah, great. So talk to us really quickly about how you made that transition. Certainly Jim's words seem to have a deep impact on you, but you're at a large, stable, well-resourced place, and you're thinking, maybe startup.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I started at bigger companies and then went to a startup. Yeah. And there's certainly paths where people start at startups first, and then and whatnot. And I think for me, at least for like databases, information retrieval, machine learning, if you really want to learn that well, it's really hard to beat what you can do at Google. or Yahoo or Microsoft, just because they have access to all the data. They have great resources and talent and infrastructure, so you can really learn a lot from that. And I think what caused me to jump was really the fact that if you look at some of these properties that we worked on, like for example, if you look at the Yahoo homepage, yahoo.com, it serves like 100 million page views, and so we did the machine learning behind that site. So we were the first ones to. So before we worked on that product, it was ran like a magazine. So basically, you had editors, and they were selecting what content was getting put on that website, and that was being served to tons of markets and in front of hundreds of millions of page views, and that just felt very inefficient, right? It felt like you can use science to at least know when to take something down. Otherwise, things can get stale. What if that user's coming back? They see the same content. Like, we should be able to be smarter than that if we use algorithms. And so we worked on a project to run that with machine learning, and we were able to improve the click-through rates on the homepage like by 300%. It was significant. And then it gets to a point, same thing with Google Search Quality and a bunch of other products in the consumer space, where you're almost like over-optimizing, right? You're like you're fighting for like a 0.5% improvement in like DCG or something like that, and that's huge. It makes like hundreds of millions of dollars for the business, but it's still like a 0.5% improvement. Versus like, why don't we take some of that tech and apply it to a greenfield area that has like they're not doing anything with their data, and you can get like a 300% lift or 400% lift. And so just that thought and that gap I was seeing outside of Google made me want to jump and do it. And so the way I did it was I transitioned through a VC firm. So I joined a venture capital firm as an entrepreneur in residence. I spent like 6 months there incubating on the idea. It also gave me a platform to go and recruit my co-founders. And then we went all in and did it. And we focused on the enterprise, which is where a lot of decisions inside companies are not based on data. And so it just felt like a very good place to go after. And so.
Nice. So Razmig, let's rewind to your story. You've started different startups. Did you go the VC firm route? How do you go from idea to we're bringing something to life?
So what Embrace it was typically foundations and grants. And then we won a competition at MIT, and I think that helped. We were able to raise more, but we didn't need much because we needed proof of concept and a lot of R&D. So the team moved to India. We had an office in Bangalore, and with very low capital, we're able to sustain with the grant capital. With Viki, honestly, it was tough. At that point, so my co-founders, one was at Stanford, my classmate, and the other one, his wife was at Harvard. We were going to do a language learning startup initially. And language learning, as in you create subtitles, you're watching a show, and you can sort of learn a new language. You can have two languages at the same time. So we approached one of the VCs that was sort of attached to the project. He put in the initial $200,000, and we ran out of the money. I ran out of money many times, or very close to running out of money. And I think it's healthy for startups because it makes it creative. But we put all the money we had. We were on credit cards. I borrowed from my mother-in-law, which scared the shit out of me. Maybe if you want to test your mettle for startups, borrow from your in-laws. I wanted to return that money. So that kind of motivated me to a certain extent. And then moved to Singapore because my co-founders had moved to Korea. At that point, raising from Singapore became tough, even though we had some Valley DNA. I kept flying back and forth, and we had a lot of no's. And eventually, after a lot of no's, there was one yes. That one yes for us was Joe Ito, who was the head of the MIT Media Lab. He said, 15-minute slot with Reid Hoffman at Greylock, the co-founder of LinkedIn, but you have to come to his house on a Sunday, and this was Thursday. And so I flew directly to his house, and we had a 2-hour conversation, said stay another day, come meet the Greylock team. And but 4 p.m. that day, we had an answer. They wanted to lead the round. They introduced me to Mark Andreessen, so Andreessen Horowitz as well came in. We're like, I think their second investment. And it just opened up. After all those no's, all of a sudden there were so many yeses, we got oversubscribed. And then it became easier because once you raise from sort of tier 1 investors, when things get bad, at least the tier 2s want to be affiliated with the Greylocks and Andreessen Horowitz of the world. Social Plus Capital was in as well. And then from there, the C's will be affiliated with the B's. So it's almost like an insurance policy. And with the third one now, frankly, like if you've done other startups in the past, it just gets easier and easier because you go back to them. Right. And they're like, well, are you really going to do it? Like, what is it you're doing? It's like, I don't know what it's going to look at, what it's going to be like, but are you going to do it? Yes, we're going to do it. Then the terms become a little friendlier as well. Right. And
so you have built the credibility over time.
Yeah.
Let's rewind, though, to that point where you're hearing no. over and over and over and over again. How do you manage those moments? And how do you know whether to keep running with something or
Yeah.
step back?
It's tough. Every moment has to be important. I have 2 kids too, so hearing that, like, it's reminding me of my 3-year-old. And I was building while we had 2 young kids, and you have to say a lot of no's yourself. So you have to understand what's important. There are a lot of shiny things you want to jump on. So I understood from VC's perspective that we were not for them. But at the same time, it just hurts. Like, you take this stuff personally, but you have to believe that what you're doing is important. If it's a job, then you don't want to be there. You'll quit. It's not going to work out. Startups are not jobs, and that's why you want to hire people that also feel like they're vested and owned in it. So for us, it was, I don't know, lifestyle or part of what we were doing. So if you hear no, you're just going to keep at it. And I think just after that first yes, we started realizing that there are also yeses mixed with the no's. When it came to the Series B and when it came time to the exit, it was the same. But you have to believe that what you're doing is something important and right. Maybe you're part crazy, part delusional, but I don't know. It was tough, and we pulled through it. I took an amazing team around me as well to say, hey, like, let's keep at it.
Yeah.
The highs and lows of startups are so close to each other. If it's not for a really strong team, it's hard. It can snap out of that curve, and I think it takes an amazing team to get you there as well.
Great. So we've heard
It's a blur.
really strong idea, conviction that you've got something there, really strong team. Vik, what would you add to the recipe for successful startups?
Luck is really important too. Luck, timing. I would say one thing that was really popular, I think, when we were starting our company up, and that wasn't too long ago. You hear VCs saying it's all about execution, right? Ideas are a dime a dozen. It's all about execution. It's not entirely true. I wish that was true.
So tell us the truth here.
Yeah, I mean, idea is really important, and you get tested on that because you can have the best team in the world, and you see a lot of these teams that are getting assembled. You go into MIT, you get folks from Stanford, Berkeley, Google folks. In fact, they're more of the dime a dozen now. You just see lots of companies getting started with those types of people. And so the big differentiation is, do you have it? Do you have something that you can go and get traction around? And especially with the way the seed and Series A and Series B is going down, the way Series A rounds are being raised at, you got to have traction going into the Series A. And so you really need to prove value outside of your deck and outside of your team. Ideally, I mean, there's cases where if you have relationships or if you know them, you can get by. But I think even in those cases, I would argue you'd still want to have a good idea. I mean, startups are really hard, and you want to make sure you're really into it. And it kind of goes into this whole conviction. Like, you can't really be into it unless you really believe in the idea. And I think for us, I think 2 things helped us. One is that we really believe in the idea. To us, it was a no-brainer. Why aren't we using this stuff outside of Google, inside businesses, helping people trying to find new customers? Just feels like such a obvious area. And when we started talking to customers about this, or potential customers, they thought this stuff was science fiction. They didn't even believe it. They didn't even think this stuff could work. And so it's that's how big the gap was. Yeah. But then it gave us extra conviction to go and prove them wrong, right? And say, no, this stuff really does work. It's not just a Google thing. It can be applied to lots of different problems. And I think the other thing that helped was, and I know I mentioned this before when we were chatting earlier. So Chung and Yang, my co-founders, they when you bring in great folks like that around you, it really makes you step up your game. It's really hard to build startups on your own. You really want people around you. It's not just for speed. It's not just for development. It's like you need forcing functions as much as possible who are going to push you to your limit. And nothing beats having really good people around you, and especially when they have to make trade-offs to be able to be a part of a startup. And especially early stage where you don't have that much cash, you're just selling the dream. Like, they have to believe in something. And so in the case of Yang, he was in his PhD program, 5th year at MIT, about to defend his thesis. And then I called him up, and he dropped out. And I had to talk to his mom and convince him to. And back in my head, I'm like, maybe he shouldn't. Maybe he should just finish the thesis defense. MIT doesn't make it easy like Stanford to come back and finish the PhD. You almost have to start again. And and then Chung, he was at Google for 5 years, and he just got into the Stanford PhD program. And we called him up, and he didn't go down that path, and so PhDs got wrecked, and parents were wondering what was going to happen. And but that's what makes you have to figure it out. And you're gonna have to pivot, you're gonna have to iterate. Your first idea is probably not right, but as long as you got the market right, hopefully you can get through it. And so I think you need to have forcing functions, and you have to have a good idea. You have to have a good market.
Fantastic. So Razmig, we feel like this has been the long teaser. What is your latest venture?
So we haven't even launched, but the whole idea is just try and fix like local news. I think Twitter is, the way I see it, at least for news, is broken. And we're going to build city feeds, but a little bit like Viki, where the people reporting have to live in that area. So it's going to be hyper-local. If you're living in the Mission and you want to read what's happening around you, you want reporters living there. Mm-hmm. So we're building a correspondence community to actually report at a very local level. We're going to start with 6 cities. And part of this is I just feel there are a lot of untold stories out there that you're not going to see on CNN and BBC, and it's important to give them the light of day. I spent some time with the United Nations in Sudan before the country broke up as well, with Ashoka, UN, et cetera. And you see crazy things on the ground, like people renting guns for $5 overnight so they can go and rob and hopefully make more than $5 back. Stuff that's not reported. So I want to be able to look at these untold stories and bring them to light. And we feel the way to do it is sort of at a local level, and local, but at a global stage. Like every city is just local, and the best stories can ripple from one place to another. It's called Ripple. Not .com, but .co. This is not the XRP one, but we'll see. So we're starting with a team of 5, and I felt like this time it has to be an amazing team. If we can, I made a lot of mistakes in the early days with Viki, opportunistically hiring anyone that looked good on paper. So now we're like, okay, we're not sure exactly what it's going to look like, but we feel the market is there and the opportunity is there. Yeah. Let's try and find the right product that fits through it. So it's exciting. I'm excited to be in this phase again.
Yeah.
And I forgot how hard it is to go literally from the 0 to 1 phase.
So describe that phase for us. Paint a picture of what does day-to-day look like. What are you dealing with?
We want to kill a lot of things quickly. Like it's a bit of cliche, but if you're going to fail, fail fast. Mm-hmm. So we shipped 3-4 different types of the early prototype with different types of users just to test what's working. Mm-hmm. We would build something great like very quickly, and then we would entirely scrap that and build another product. So we're pretty data driven this time. Like we're measuring everything. Or at Viki, we got to data like year 2, year 3, and I think that was a bit of a mistake. But in the early phase, like my job really is to try and get a great team together, and that's where a lot of my effort is. But really testing yourself, like frankly, we don't need to do another startup, but we're excited to do it, and it has to be important enough before it's big enough. Mm-hmm. So you're always every day testing. Again, if you have family and if you have an opportunity cost, you have to believe that it's important enough. That's the initial test. That took us 6 months. Are we really doing this? We want to do this. Is it important enough? So we passed that hurdle. Now it's like, okay, how do we go to market, and what do we need to build? So we're in that phase now of testing everything, learning from a ton of data, looking at Twitter, fire hose at the data, analyzing it, where the journalists are, what kind of stuff they're doing, working with Instagram. And so I'm looking at a lot of data analysis right now to see how we can build something that matters. Fantastic.
You mentioned earlier with this new venture, you're really trying to avoid some of the mistakes that you made in previous.
There were a ton,
What, Vik, will come to you. The dreaded question of what mistakes have you made along the way so that we can learn from them?
Yeah, there's plenty of mistakes you make, especially when it's your first startup, and even if they're second or third. Startups are all about embracing failure and how you bounce back. I think there's kind of the smaller things, but I think in the beginning when you're trying to crystallize the idea, like that whole kind of that 0 phase, and it depends if you're in the enterprise side or the consumer side. For us, it was about how do we get to 10 customers, how do we get to like 50 customers, how do we get to 100 customers, how do we get, hit those different milestones. And to get to like 1 or 2 customers, you can do it through relationship. And heck, you could do 10 through relationship, but at that point you need something that's consistent. Otherwise, you're doing consulting for each account. So the first 2, you gotta find out the right customers to do that with. And I think that was a very important learning for us, is that you have to pick your customers very wisely, because your customers are going to make you overfit on your product a little bit. And so we had a decision to make, which is, do we focus on bigger customers, or like the Fortune 500 types, or do we focus on like smaller companies or mid-market companies? And we dabbled with a larger account to start, and And we're fortunate to fail fast and go towards a mid-market company and focus more on the mid-market. And that ended up being a much better strategy for us for a variety of reasons. One is if you go after one customer that's a big customer to start, you are becoming employees of that company, whether you like it or not. They are very heavyweight, they're slow, it's hard to get feedback. The cycles are really long, both sales-wise as well as product feedback-wise. Integration with IT is a pain. Like everything is just slower. And like the biggest risk for your startup is time and how you manage it. And so mid-market is better because you have companies that have enough scale, enough people, enough data to be able to do something meaningful. But they can move faster. It was only probably a couple years before that they were a startup too. And so they get you culturally. And so we decided to go after mid-market companies to start, and that ended up being a much, much better place to go. And it's much easier to go from mid-market and then go up-market because then you have all this leverage. Now you have like 100 plus companies using your product. You know what your product does. You know how to sell into them. You can grow into it. So that was one issue that if I can rewind it, I would have tried to have come to that sooner. I think the other thing too are just more novice mistakes like trying to keep your idea guarded when your idea isn't there yet, and I think it's better to be very open and transparent about your idea in the early days and try to get as much feedback as possible. Just like some concern that you think someone might steal your idea, all that stuff, and in reality, if it was easy to steal, it's probably not a good startup anyways. And so you should try to get as much feedback as possible, and be very, very open, and just be confident that you can figure it out and do it better than the rest. And I think because your idea is most likely wrong. Right, like at least the initial premise of it is there's something wrong with it because it's like the chances of you throwing a dart at a dartboard and hitting the bullseye on the first try probably unlikely. You probably need like 2 or 3, but hopefully you're directionally correct. And so you need people who can push back on you and give you good feedback. And so I think we were a little too guarded in the beginning, and I think that would have helped bring feedback faster to us. And I think, those are the 2 big ones that come to mind in the early stage. But the challenges change over time too as you scale. Hiring is one of the hardest things you can do in a startup, especially when you're in that only co-founder stage and you don't have capital raised yet. It's like the hardest thing to do. And how do you keep your bar high while trying to hire people that are probably not hireable, given that you're not very desirable. And
so how do you manage that?
You just have to persevere and keep your bar high. There's really no way around it. You cannot lower your bar, period. It will be disastrous to your business, as tempting as it is. It took us like 6 months to make our first hire outside the co-founding team. And it was stressful. It made us question, can we even hire? And then we got a really good hire made, and then that made it easier to get the next hire, and then it becomes a lot better. And then once you have venture capital and you have traction and you have a story, it gets better and better. But you have to just bite your teeth and try to keep your bar high, and that's very, very difficult, especially in markets like this, especially where the bigger companies, especially on the software side, are able to spend lots of money for their employees. You have to really be able to sell the dream and learn how to recruit. And so those are the kind of the 3 things. And I think for on the hiring side specifically, even though you're a startup and you're smaller and you don't have that much cash, I would say do not hesitate to invest in the right people. Even if you have to be smart from a cash balance perspective, but the most important thing you can do is invest in people. And so for us, the way we try to deal with things is we are willing to compete with the market, including the bigger companies, because we want the best talent on our team. And then obviously you get all the upside of a startup and the equity. And so it's very expensive to do that, but it's so worth it. And it's better to get one really good person versus like 5 mediocre individuals. And so those 3 things are things I wish we did sooner.
Awesome. So as you think about, if you're a student sitting here thinking, I'm interested in a startup, what are the things that you would say are essential? We've heard sort of the ability to stomach the highs and the lows, that you have to be passionate about the concept and be able to sell it to yourself and to others. What else would you add to that list, Razmig?
You have to solve a real problem. I think ultimately, okay, it's good to have an idea, it's good to get a team that can execute against the idea, but if you're not solving a real problem, like you might have an early pop and not necessarily be able to build a company. Make sure it's not a feature, it's not just a product, it's a company. If that's, because startups are companies, they're more than the first two. It's a lonely process, like you mentioned. It's find the smartest people in the room, like you said, and make sure you're hiring like people smarter than you. Because when the A's start hiring B's, the B's will hire C's, and it's going to be a bad spiral. So that bar definitely has to be high. And you definitely have to be passionate about it. It's not, it's win or die, right? Like when you're doing a startup, so you got to be willing to wake up and go to battle. Beyond that, you're going to fail. It's just normal. Like there are a lot of failures to get to one successful startups. And like I was saying, the highs and lows are so condensed. Like, I don't know, 6 months before the exit, I had a list of half my team, like maybe 45, 50 people I was thinking of letting go because I had to preserve cash. But things change too. Like you got to have the stomach for that and realize that the different phases for the startup will require different skill sets. So in some cases you might not have it, you need to shore it up, or in some cases you might shine later on where it's needed. If it's not the funding, it's the go-to-market side. But frankly, I'd say you'll learn a tremendous amount, even if it doesn't work out. I have a lot of friends that are at great corporate jobs, and they always wonder what if, startups. And I don't know how happy all of them are, but I know a lot that also the startups didn't work out, but they were really happy with that experience. So we are all startups, right, in our own lives and with everything we do daily. So take that and build something. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm just trying to think of how to relate this. It's because there's so many important but abstract concepts around startups that we can kind of talk about for a long time. And I think it's until you're in it, it's then you start to really realize these things and soak it in. And by that point, you probably forget everything you hear in this discussion, anyways. And then you internalize it and personalize these learnings on your own. I think to echo kind of the point around the problem, I think a good litmus test is what I'm working on. Can I do it better inside a bigger company, or does it deserve its own company with its own focus to be able to make it happen? And I think, and really being intellectually honest about that question is really important. And it's also really important to surround yourself with really smart people and people who are smarter than you, and that intellectual honesty is really important because that is a startup. The startup is basically the search for the truth. In a very pure philosophical way of thinking of it. And so in order to get to the truth, you have to be able to back down. You're not always going to be right in discussion. Your co-founders may not always be right in the discussion. Your customers may not be right in the discussion, but you have to read between the lines and just do what makes sense and leave the ego outside the door. And that's so important because one of the big things in a startup, especially early on, is how you manage uncertainty. And the only way you can really do that is by being really, really honest about the process and having really good people around you, because it is a very uncertain thing. Every day you're kind of like, is this, am I doing the right thing? Is this still gonna work? It's probably not gonna work, oh my God. And then you just every single day have to get a little bit closer to the truth. And so intellectual honesty and really trying to make sure that people give you good feedback. One thing that we ran into early on was because we were able to raise money from top tier investors. When we started getting feedback from folks who are connected to them and they're connected to everybody, the feedback was filtered, right? Because they don't want to burn a relationship or be too hard on us. Now, some people would, and I think that's good. But it got to a point where we get into these meetings and say, hey, I don't want to hear about the 10 different things that you like about us. I want to hear about what's wrong. Right? Because there's obviously things that are wrong. We don't have a product built, right? We don't have no customers. There's something wrong. So grill us, because I don't want to spend 30 minutes. That's that intellectual
honesty you're talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's so easy to go in discussions and hear what you want to hear, and you just waste a lot of time in a startup doing that. And so I think being intellectually honest in the process will get you really far, and not many people do that.
Build on that quickly. I think it's an important point on the startup side. So the problem you're solving, like even the mission statement of what you want to build or the culture that you want to build, the stuff takes time. It takes history, it takes cultivation. Like you just don't know what you're going to build 3 years out. It's important to solve a big problem, but everyone thinks that if you look at Google, you look at Facebook, if you look in hindsight, there were different companies. And if you ask these founders, if they're intellectually honest, they'll tell you we had no idea we will be where we are today. So it's okay to start and iterate, and it's okay to take time with it and to build that culture, to build that history and cultivate it over time. Don't expect it to be like what you have today. So you might pivot, but you need to find your spine. You need to find your core of what's driving you to build that thing. And if you're honest about that and you're honest about the mistakes of how you might pivot around it, I think that's an important one too. But if it's not working in 3 months, I wouldn't say, give up. Just give it time and surround yourself with amazing people.
Yeah, it also sounds like one of the key skills people can cultivate now is this mindset of I am wrong or I can be wrong. And in fact, from that, I'm going to learn. Before we open it up to questions, final thoughts, advice that you would have for people if they're sitting there thinking about startups? We've got lots of nuggets of wisdom. What's the final thought?
I have maybe one mistake that was important to cover. A lot of people are just jumping on the shiniest things in terms of startups and businesses, and I think it's okay to say a lot of no's. Like in the early days of startups, there'll be a lot of exciting opportunities. India's big, China's big, this possible partnership, and I think we wasted 90% of our time on that stuff. So you'll be if the startup is working in the early days, the first 3 months saying a lot of no's is so important, because if you go down the rabbit hole and it's the wrong rabbit hole, I think the opportunity cost is very high. And I see a lot of successful startups that get funding initially and they're on this trajectory, and then once they raise the money, it kind of slows down because they jump in many different directions. That was one thing I think that was important to us. Two is don't focus too much on the equity. I wanted board control, and it paid off towards the end. We were in Singapore. I was worried about this investors, big investors, like again, the Greylocks and Andreessen Horowitz. I said, I'll give up a little bit more, maybe 5% more, but I want to make sure that I control the board and we have more board seat as investors. And that paid off over time because we were so far away. They had no idea what we're building. I needed to take time with it. Yeah. A lot of people are fighting on about the slices of the pie. Just focus on making the size of the pie bigger. So as you're setting up your startups earlier, make sure, again, you're getting the right team and you're focused more on the bigger picture, even if you give up a little bit up front, because it could be one step back for 10 steps forward down the road. Don't jump on the shiniest things. Take time. Don't marry the first person you meet. Or maybe do.
Life advice for Razmig. Vik.
I think the folks here, I think the decision you're going to have to face when you graduate is, am I going to join? I guess the way it was when I was here, and I don't know if things have changed, but my perspective has changed since being in the workplace, is the decision was always, do I join a big company or do I join a startup? And those are such extremes on the spectrum. And it's understandably so, because companies like Microsoft and Google and Facebook and Yahoo, those are well-known companies. And so you have these kind of big cap companies that people are aware of, and then there's this kind of these startups that you hear about, and there's these unknown startups or doing your own startups. And it's kind of there are two extremes on the spectrum. And in reality, I think what you want to figure out is, what stage do you want to start at? Because there's more stages than that. Yes, there's the 0 to 1 stage, there's the 10-person companies, and yes, there's the tens of thousands of people companies, but there's other stages there too. There's late stage, Series C, Series D companies, or Series B companies. And I think the reason why they may not get as much attention is that they're a little bit harder to find, because you either hear about it when they kind of hit, full escape velocity, they're a big company or considered to be a big company, and then the startup path. And I think there's more access now to identifying companies in those different stages. There's lots of different sources now. You can look on, even TechCrunch and Crunchbase, and by stage, you can literally see companies with different, amounts of funding and different employee sizes. And I think the thing I would have done is talked to and interviewed with companies across the spectrum, versus thinking of them as extreme polarities, because I think you'll be able to get a lot from that, from those interviews. Interviews is not about getting a job, it's about building relationships and learning too, right? It's a great way to justify taking someone's time at a company. I will always interview with someone if it's an interview, and it's a great way for them to build a relationship, and that kind of hit me later on in life. It's not just about getting a job, it's a lot bigger than that. And so use that as a way to build relationships and learn about different environments and figure out, hey, this company has a really interesting culture. They're 200 people. They're working on an idea that I really like. The 200 people size, it feels right. It has enough safety there. It has enough structure that I think I can learn a lot there. Or you might, see these smaller 10-person companies, and you go, okay, that's the right environment for me. The culture is really good. Or it's hey, I really like Microsoft. I really want to work at a really large company and do things there. I think if you think of it by stage versus these extremes, I think it really helps. And people always say startups are incredibly risky, right? 99% of them fail, That's not entirely true, because you really need to look at it by stage again, right? If you look at 10-person companies, then it's probably like close to 100% failure rate. Yeah, that's totally true. But once you start to get later stage, I would question that. And when I was a EIR at a VC firm, there was EIRs there as well, and they were doing their third startup. Some of them were doing their fourth startup, all of which had incredible exits or went public. And so if you talk to them and you ask them how they did it, how did you get 4 winners right? It's not because they did early stage every time. They just joined at the right time. They joined when it was big enough and there was enough momentum there. So they were joining late stage. And so I would definitely think of it along that spectrum and try to sample across that spectrum and figure out what feels right to start with. And then over time, you can see if it makes sense to go lower or higher based on that. So.
I love that. So really the spirit of experimentation at work in your own career of what seems right, is it a good fit, and then iterate from there. Fantastic. With that, let's go ahead and open it up for questions from the audience. We've got mics ready for you guys to go.
If you all, with your questions, can just introduce yourself, that would be fantastic. I know you all have questions. I'm curious. I've got some questions. You talked about interviewing a lot. When you were still at Cal, I'm curious, what kind of companies did you interview with?
All big companies. So, and that's where I was. So it was Microsoft, Google. Did I interview with anyone else? I did interview with Intel. And then I also did a stint at Intel Research here. I think it was in the Power Bar building. I don't know if it's still there. So not too many. And those were like, from an internship perspective versus like a full-time perspective, they're totally different things. I think the internship program at Google, which was early when I was there, and then Microsoft, were so structured that they're really great places to do internships. And I know Facebook has their own internship program, and that's also very structured. You can meet lots of people. And so I think from an internship perspective, I think it can make a lot of sense to go with one of those places. But once you go full-time, I think it's a different thing, right? Because I think when you're doing internship stuff, I don't think, at least, you should be trying to figure out, is a startup the right place for you? At least for me, I didn't want to do that. It was more about refining my craft. Where can I go and learn how to build systems? Where can I go and learn how to do really good software engineering? And it's really hard to beat big companies in that regard. You don't move as fast. You can't ship onto Google.com on your first day. But it's you learn so much about process and approach that when you go into a smaller environment, you at least know where it should go as you scale. And that's kind of nice. But you do lose the agility that you get in a smaller environment. But I think you have to figure out when you graduate, I think you should sample and do interviews across the board and really get a sense of what environment you want to go in and have an impact. Because impact is a little bit harder in the bigger companies to achieve.
Vik, I don't know if you want to also answer.
Razmig.
Yeah, short one. So it was PIS major, so I looked at the World Bank, IMF, UN, those kind of interviews. So that was one track. And then management consulting and banking, because I was just learning about that stuff, like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, et cetera. And I ended up in management consulting because I got an offer. I was like, okay, I'll pay the loans. I think you had a question.
I do. Hi, I'm Linda, and I'm a graduating senior at the House School of Business. And it was very refreshing to hear your stories. So I have a question about your company's performance. How do you set the metrics to evaluate performance at your workplace?
I'll take that.
So we're a little bit more traditional. I mean, we do the OKR style approach. So we have 3 OKRs that are company level wide. And then those are objective key results. So we try to come up with 3 things that we think are important that are measurable. That's across the entire company. And we do that on a quarterly basis. And then each department has their own 3 OKRs that they care about for the quarter as well. And it's all kind of inherents from the parent. So we have our company level, and then they use that to determine what the OKRs are for their departments, and then those cascade all the way down to individual OKRs. So each individual has their own OKRs. And so when managers are talking to the reports, they are looking at their OKRs at least once a month to review how they're doing against their performance on those. And when we look at it department-wide, when I'm meeting with my department leads, I look at it from their department-level OKRs. And then company-level OKRs we present to the rest of the team. We give monthly updates on that, and then a quarterly update in terms of how we did. So for us, at least, product is still very important to us, and so we have OKRs that are about that. But for enterprise, especially once you start going to Series B, Series C, you're really about the revenue and the customer logos and the churn and trying to really make sure you manage those right. So we set really aggressive targets on those ones. And honestly, those targets are targets that require everyone on the team to be able to hit, including engineering. And so our OKR is a little bit more biased towards the business objectives. How much our annual recurring revenue is going to be, how much new ARR we're bringing into the business this quarter, how much churn are we going to experience, can we achieve negative churn, how much negative churn do we want to get this quarter, and any new products that we want to launch and release, and then a metric against that in terms of success. Like we're trying to get that to like 10 more customers, we want to get active usage every week or something like that. We've set those up. And so that ends up being a really good way to do it. We try to avoid doing more than 3 or 4 OKRs just because it doesn't become memorable. And that's the hardest part, is to come up with like 3 goals for your entire company for like a quarter is really, really difficult to keep all the departments aligned. But you have to make it really short and concise, or else it's going to get forgotten. And at that point, they almost become irrelevant.
I'll talk about Viki. I mean, our stuff it was more fluffy. I mean, you can tell who's the engineer here, I guess, maybe from the answers. If it's working, and you know it. I think there's a feel, and you can tell if there is that product market fit. And one of our advisors and early investors from Social Capital, Chamath Palapatiya, who was the first head of growth at Facebook, he's like, you have 5 objectives: growth, 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 community, and then revenues. That was the order. We're like, okay, growth. So you can look at growth in many different ways. So we were pretty analytical on that end. We would look at users, we would look at where they're coming from, we'd do cohort analysis, would figure out our unit level economics for content. And we came up with a model that worked well for Viki, which pretty much was content arbitrage. We would license content everywhere except the home country. So licensing US shows in the US per 1 hour is about $70,000 per episode per year. The same show in Southeast Asia, it will cost us maybe $300. So you can easily arbitrage that because you can get similar high CPM ad in those markets, and we were able to map this entirely. One school of thought would have been launch in one market, learn exactly what's working there, rinse and repeat that in other markets. I went broad. I just wanted to see like all the data that's available, what's working, what's not, and maybe that's one of the reasons we were going to run out of money. But with that much data, in hindsight, you can do a lot of analysis. I knew it's working. I just didn't know what content would work where and what that arbitrage could look like. And then there is softer stuff. I mean, for me, I knew like engineering, if the throughput and velocity was working really well, if there were more bugs. We're shipping faster, we're breaking things faster, and that was important to me. There were things that you don't necessarily can capture in detail, but it would give me a sense about the health of the company and those groups. And we were pretty open with data. I wanted to make sure everyone sees the data. Like you have to be intellectually honest, like you're saying, and you can't lie to yourself, especially to your team, because they know. If you're hiring people smarter than you, they know. Like they will see the stuff on the inside. So our data was everywhere inside the office. Yes, sometimes when the VCs would walk in, we'd put Korean dramas up, but when they leave, the data would come back up, and everyone would get to see what's working, what's not working, and that really gets everyone on the same page and fighting the same battle. Does that help?
Yeah, and also just the observation that there's no one right way to do it so much as figuring out what works for your team.
What I'm learning. This is good stuff.
Yeah, there you go.
I love rigor. Maybe on the next one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm June. So I'm a first-year student. It's more of a question for Raz, because you're a liberal arts major and I'm a liberal arts major too. So I'm just wondering how that experience translates to you starting a business. It's definitely different from an engineering perspective.
Perhaps honestly, like once you graduate, the majors you throw them out the door, because if you're a problem solver, you're a problem solver. Like you have to be creative about how you approach problems, and even in liberal arts, like I felt PEIS was fairly challenging to me, and English wasn't even my first or second language. So I had to go deep in what I got challenged at Berkeley, and which I loved, which I didn't expect this is what college would be like. Is like you're not regurgitating, you really have to challenge what you're reading, and I love that. And startups are that. Like you're always like trying to challenge assumptions, validate assumptions, and I think a lot of that came in handy. The Haas major, I did PIS, but I also did the Haas undergrad. The whole finance, accounting, the business side, I think that helped me quite a bit, like at least when it came to being an analyst for management consulting. But when it came to the startup, none of that stuff really was applicable, because if you need to do well in finance, you're going to hire someone that knows finance really well, like hire someone out of Wharton, right? If you need that MBA. So you're able to see the broader picture. And maybe the soft skills, like I loved actually math, like growing up, and I tried to take a lot of that track, but at the same time, I liked the balance. Like I would jump around in many different places. Like I was saying at Stanford, I did as little as I can on the business side, and I took a lot of classes in different places. So maybe if you're curious enough and you're intellectually like challenging a lot of the assumptions of what you're seeing in class, I think that's a really good training for a startup. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's roughly the feel. Just you got to be really critical about how you approach problem solving, be it engineering or not engineering.
Is there one more question? Yes?
Oh, I was wondering if Elaine could talk about that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I think college, absolutely, majors go out the door. As Vik was saying, I was one of those debate kids, and I went to law school. I followed that route. I'm now doing consulting work around conflict management, leadership teams that can't talk with one another. If you've got a CEO and a CTO that can't communicate, that impacts your ability to do most things. So I'm appreciating the chuckle there. Thank you. So not really thinking so much about what is the job I'm going to fill, so much as what are the things that make me tick? What are the things that are interesting to me? What's the problem and the challenge that I find intriguing? For me, the problem or the challenge is people not communicating well. And how do we fix that? How do we help people do whatever they're doing better? And so my work is across all industries, but that's the little piece that I'm focusing on. So I think what non-engineering, studies teach you is how to think and how to look at the world and find something that intrigues you and figure out how to do that well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great.
Hello, my name is Victor. I'm a senior at Haas School of Business. Thank you for talking to us today. It was a great experience just listening to you guys. So I have a question for you and another one for you. So you talked about being in Korea and in Asia, basically, and doing your startup. So at this time, did you have customers, and how were you able to convince the first VC to give you that money? What metric did you show? Because I know VCs don't just give you money; you have to show some metrics, some growth curve that convinces them to give you money. And then for the other guy, for your product did not have you didn't have customers, right? So I think from listening to you, so why did they invest in you? Basically, what convinced them?
Razmig, let's start with you.
I think you answered it. You said why they invest in you. I think in the Series A in the early stage, they really have to like the team, because there's a really high chance, like you're saying, if you're under 10 people, that it's not going to work. I had to be in Singapore. That's where we moved opportunistically. My wife needed to be there. She had a grant for graduate studies, and maybe a little too personal on this side, but since high school, we've been moving for each other. My undergrad, she moved for me, I moved for her, so this was her turn. So I was like, okay, hey, if we can do it. Maybe I'm a little stubborn. We don't have to do it in Silicon Valley. Everyone said you have to be here to build a company. It helped that we were tucked away there. It helped that the Singapore government actually, surprisingly, was very helpful. Like we would get a visa, the equivalent of an H-1 visa here, in 1 week. So we're hiring engineers. Like we built a 40-person engineering team very, very quickly, and people from Google and Facebook, et cetera, that wanted to have an experience outside of the US. So we kind of got stuck there. We didn't have to be there that long, but I was like, this is working. Content is around here. I can easily travel from here. The infrastructure is good. The government is supporting. Now that I'm here and I'm trying to build the engineering team, it's crazy. Like I'm missing Singapore, honestly, when it comes to that, because there was really strong engineering there too. And here everyone is looking for, I don't know, they have a certain mindset of what startups can look like. But Singapore was the reason for it was there. And the first investors, you have to find that angle of really what's important. I had selling. So I had to, you have to be yourself and honest, and I think that authenticity is important. With Joey Ito, what worked well after those many no's, his sister was a fan translator for the Japanese anime community from the 80s. So he got it, and he connected me, and we kind of kicked it off, and we were talking about why we're doing what we're doing. I grew up watching Bollywood movies in Egypt with my dad without subtitles. And I would love it, but that was our Saturday 2 hours, and you can follow the script and what's happening. And I wanted to be able to imagine if there were subtitles on this and what it looks like. So it was important to me, and I think the story connected with Joey's sister, and she said this is an interesting idea. You should take a chance on it. So Joey brought in Reed, and like I was saying, it kind of dovetailed. But you need that one yes, and that one critical yes, I think, can open things. So that's why you shouldn't give up on after a lot of those no's.
Yeah, for us, there's kind of two stages, right? There's the seed stage and there's kind of the Series A stage. And so in the seed stage, so what I did was I was a EIR at a VC firm, and so I kind of leveraged that for as long as possible. So even though we didn't have raised money yet, I was on their payroll and I was using that to bring people on, and so that was nice. And we did have to do some sell for the seed, and the seed was a small round. We raised like $1-2 million, and for that, I had my two co-founders who we recruited, and we had an idea, which was, if you look at the whole way companies, sell their products and how they get new customers, they're using these, legacy CRM systems, like Salesforce is a big one, and these companies have hundreds of thousands of companies using this platform, and they're entering all this data about all their customers in the system, and for what? It's basically a system for telling you which sales reps to fire and basic reporting. That's it. For all that work and money you invest in that system, there's got to be more you can do with that. And we felt that predictive could be a game changer because that data is right there. It gives you all the data. You can learn from that, a model to find new customers. And so the premise of it was huge if it worked. And so I think the fact that we can paint a big market and also show that our team was unique in the ability to deliver solutions around predictive, because everything we were doing up to that point was around machine learning in big companies. And so that was unique because you didn't have a lot of consumer guys coming into the enterprise. And so we were able to kind of raise some money off that. And then during our seed stage, we started deploying with companies, and so when we deployed with our first company, we doubled their conversion rate, which was significant. So they signed a multi-year, six-figure contract, which was great. And then it spread to another company, and we had similar results, and it just kept going. And so by year end, we had public companies, IPOs to private companies using our product, getting lift, paying significant contract values, all six-figure contracts, and it was just me and my two co-founders. We had no salespeople. Our website, our company name at the time was Party on Data, and literally, if you went to partyondata.com, it was a stick figure dancing on zeros and ones. And I remember when we went through the IT security review with Tableau, which was one of our customers that first year. They were about to go public, and so naturally they're going to do a security review on us, and then so they called us saying, hey, I think your website got hacked. I'm like, no, it didn't get hacked. All that love's going to your product, don't worry. And somehow we were able to keep that account alive, and so we're like, hey, this is getting ridiculous. And we were profitable. We were very profitable, and so it got to the point where it was just so ridiculous not to raise money. And so when we raised the Series A, we kind of had our choice because you don't really have many companies going to Series A profitable with big logos and no salespeople, and so it kind of worked in our favor. So we were able to do that pretty quickly. But you absolutely do need traction, but you do need that one or two yeses to get you started. It's hard to do that much. For example, even signing up your first couple customers, you have to have some validation, especially if you're trying to recruit really good engineers. You need to have some validation, and a lot of times the validation will come from an investor and getting Andreessen Horowitz or something like that on board, because that's faster than getting success in the market, right? That takes a lot longer to build, and so that's kind of what worked for us. But we absolutely believed in traction and tried to get that early and use that as a differentiator against the other guys who are raising Series A.
Vik and Razmig, we want to thank you so much for your insights, your time, the wisdom that you shared today. We hope that it is helpful to the students here. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you for having us.